Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to speak today about an urban revitalization project under the title of the Pearling Path, which takes place in the small island of Muharraq in Bahrain. Muharraq has been known for a really long time for its tradition of pearling. Some of the oldest known pearls are known to have been found there. This is to the right, one of the oldest pierced blister pearls to have been known to have been found. It's around 5,000 years old. And next to it, pearls that were used in the Tilus area, so the Hellenistic occupation of Muharraq, that were also found in Bahrain. This is an image around from the 1930s, which shows the collection of oyster beds from the pearling season. It looks like an enormous amount of pearls, but actually the probability of finding a pearl in an oyster is around 1 to 10,000. So these are probably 2 pearls that you're looking at over here, which explains why pearls were extremely valuable. This is a 2-strand pearl necklace that's worn by a woman called Maisie Plant. This pearl necklace was evaluated in 1915 at around $1 million. It was later exchanged for the walk-up that you see to the left, that was not far from here on 5th Avenue. It was exchanged against this pearl necklace that was sold by Pierre Cartier, one of the Cartier brothers, and is up to today the flagship store of Cartier on 5th Avenue. Clearly, Maisie Plant was probably an emotional buyer because retroactively this was an extremely bad real estate deal for her. At her death, her pearl necklace was auctioned for around $120,000. Cartier recently renovated their walk-up on 5th Avenue, and you probably know better than me how much it's worth today. But it just goes to say that these pearls, up until the collapse of the pearling economy in the 1930s, were extremely sought after. They built entire cities, and they built the city of Muharraq that you see here under us. And it's really quite specific because Muharraq was built as a single product economy after pearls. So everything you see in this picture was built in direct relation to the pearling economy. Up until the late 1980s, which is when this picture was taken, most of the architectural heritage of Muharraq and urban heritage were quite intact. Unfortunately, the discovery of oil in 1932 in Bahrain, the subsequent urban development that happened, completely retransfigured the island of Muharraq, and especially the relation that the city had to the sea. Classic urban development mistakes were made. A ring road was constructed that completely separated the historic core of the city from the coastline, and the nature of the city transformed very much. But you can see here that fortunately much of the urban heritage was still left intact. And it's up to today in the region of the Arabian Gulf, one of the best preserved Islamic cities to remain. The Pearling Path project, which was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2012, obviously had two ambitions. One of it was to reconnect the island of Muharraq with its rich heritage of pearling as a big marker of cultural identity that had unfortunately disappeared. And on the other hand, to serve as a catalyst for the urban revitalization of the whole of Muharraq. So the project is a 3.5-kilometer urban trail that snakes through all the historic quarters of Muharraq, north to south. It reconnects through a pedestrian bridge the historical coastline to the rest of the city. This is what you see here, the only part of natural coastline that remains in the north of Bahrain, actually, as an effect of the extensive land reclamation that happened. It includes the restoration of 17 historic properties that all tell part of the story of pearling, from the house of the captain to the house of the pearl merchant, merchants that were trading in wood, so all the economies that related to the pearling economy. It includes as well 17 public spaces, 4 multi-story parkings, a visitor center, And probably what was the most challenging, the instauration of a building regulation that would make sure that once we finished the project, the urban structure of the city would be the same as what it was when we started, which in this part of the world is not a given at all. So this is an image here of the urban fabric as it is today. Let's say we're at the start of the project. So you can notice that obviously there's been around 60 years of lack of maintenance on most of the properties that you see here. A lot of the architectural elements have disappeared, but what you still have that's quite intact and quite unique to this really fast-paced part of the world is that the urban structure is still intact. One of the first and main challenges of the project was how to, start the impetus of this urban revitalization at such a big scale in the city. And so one of the first projects we commissioned was it was actually started as a wayfinding system that was won in a competition by Bureau Basmes and Office Kirsten Geers, David Van Severen. And the idea that they had was to add a series of public spaces within the structure of the city, and that these spaces would act as spaces of encounter between the inhabitants of the city and the visitors, and would offer spaces that no longer existed in the city. So these are images of some of the first squares that were realized. They're all built on the site of former houses that were demolished, that had become derelict and that had been left in this open state for a really long time. And obviously in this part of the world, when you leave spaces like that empty, they become car parks, and the cars take over much of the life in the city. And so these, let's say, non-spaces became once again open, green public spaces that now have new uses and breathe new life into the city. And in addition to that, there was a wayfinding system that consisted of urban street lighting that was really just juxtaposed into the urban fabric of the city as a really clear marker that guides you naturally through the maze of the historic city. So you see them popping in here, really against the urban fabric as it is. These are some examples of the historic structures that are being conserved. This is the house of a timber merchant. This is probably one of the most extravagant houses on the path. It was the house of one of the wealthiest pearl merchants. It's quite telling. Because traditionally in Islamic architecture, there were no external signs of ornamentation, and it just shows how wealthy the pearl merchants had become that they started showing external signs of ornamentation on the outside of their facades, as well as, of course, extremely decorative interiors. So this project, these are conservation projects that are going to be, that are produced by Studio Anna Holtrop. This project here is going to house a small pearl museum, and in one of the larger houses of another pearl merchant, we're introducing a small guest house that's meant to also offer people the possibility of being able to live in one of those structures. And obviously, the representational houses are maybe, the most emblematic of the project, but really the bulk of the work has been to work on the urban fabric on the whole. So a big part of the project was surveying the 400 houses that were on this 3.5 path, and really working on just catching up 70 years of maintenance that hadn't been done. We had to survey every single house, sign personal agreements with each one of these owners of these houses. It took us around 3 years. In some cases, it was a kind of wild goose chase over 3 different countries. By the time we actually reached the original owner, he had no idea this was actually his property, which opened up then a series of other problems. But this was really quite central to the success of the project. Another component of the project that we opened a bit over a year ago was the main Purling Path Visitor and Interpretation Center, which is built on the ruins of a amara. A amara is a warehouse that was used to store goods. So the boats would arrive from here, they would unload their goods, and then the goods would then find their way to the Su area, which is this road here parallel to the coast, where they would be traded. And while these structures don't exist as is today, the their urban typology is still quite present in the fabric of the city, and it was something that was really important through this project, which was designed by Valerio Olgiati, to reinstate this urban form in the city. We were quite fortunate that this large space had not been built over. It had been abandoned for around 50 years. So the project offers a roof of 7,000 square meters that gives a scenography to the ruins of the warehouse underneath, and houses a small community center that hosts workshops, exhibitions, and events that are aimed at the local community. For the anecdote, actually what we actually commissioned was the small building here, but the ambitions of the project took a different turn, and it was envisioned a lot more as a project that acted at the scale of the city. These are multi-story car parks that are designed by Christian Carrots. One of the main challenges that the city faces is obviously the lack of public spaces, and because we're moving a lot of cars from the city, urbanizing a lot of streets. And so these were the parking structures that were developed for the city. We always laugh that the design seems really challenging, but actually the biggest challenge of this specific project was presenting it to the local planning authorities and trying to keep a straight face with these very stiff planning authorities when we came with such designs. In addition to the more infrastructural needs of the city, it was also really important to conserve also the intangible heritage of the city. This is a small music house that was built by Office Kirsten Geers, David van Severen, for a specific kind of Fijeri traditional music that used to be performed on board the dhow boats to encourage the divers. The challenge of this project was that the singing happens in a certain typology that was quite traditional, with certain proportions that we didn't want to disturb. And at the same time, there was a need for them to be more visible in the city and to attract larger audiences. So the project is designed in a way that when there's performances, there's a series of facades, a mesh facade that lifts up to the street, a series of window facades that also completely open up. And when there's a performance, it becomes completely one with the street. And there's a really great interaction between the neighborhood and the events that are happening. This was a project that we actually built in Milan for the Expo in 2015. We actually commissioned it as a temporary pavilion, and the winning project was built in concrete, as you see, which was not very temporary. And so we then thought of a way of making sense of it, and we decided at the onset of the competition to request that the pavilion be dismantleable. And so it was completely dismantled at the end of the Expo, shipped, and by a very happy coincidence, it fit in a parcel of land that we had in the historic city center, where it's now open and serves as a botanical garden. And the last project I wanted to share with you is actually a project that I designed in collaboration with Leopold Manchini for a small house of architectural heritage in a very small and tight urban plot within the city. The brief was to have a space of exhibition for architecture exhibitions, but at the same time have a space that talks about the architectural heritage of the city and its evolution. And the site had these really beautiful walls from the two surrounding buildings, and we decided early on from the start that this was actually the best exhibition to actually be able to see the walls of the two surrounding houses that normally disappear when new constructions appear. The project is conceived as a bridge structure that is offset from the surrounding walls, and that completely opens up to the outside, making it, when there are exhibitions, a public passage that also invites more community participation in these events. Thank you very much.